Good evening and welcome to this presentation on BeMA, the Beirut Museum of Art. And I can't tell you how thrilled I am that we are gathered here. I'm Glenn Lowry, the director of the Museum of Modern Art. And BeMA and Beirut unite several of my passions. First of all, Amale and Dan, brilliant architects, have been friends of the larger museum family since their absolutely stunning project that they did at MoMA PS1. They transformed the courtyard of MoMA PS1 into a living garden, and I have been forever fascinated by their work. And so the fact that they are the architects for a museum in Beirut, one of the cities that I am most interested in, a place of some of the most interesting artists working today, just is an extraordinary achievement. And I want to say to Rita Namour and the entire board of BeMA, it is an act of insanity to try and build a new museum under any circumstance. But to do it in Beirut, that is amazing. You are all incredible. And I know that it will be a great success because Rita, who's a great friend, always manages to make the impossible happen. And I think as we gather here tonight to learn more about this incredible project, we need to step back and really recognize that museums are some of the most important civic spaces in our society. And in a place like Lebanon, in a city like Beirut, they mean even more than they do in places like New York or Paris. They are the glue that can hold society together. They are the place that can bring people of different points of view, different persuasions, and different backgrounds to a common space. And so when we talk about BeMA as a beacon of hope, it is a hope that glows not only because of its singular importance at a time of such difficulty in Lebanon, but it is a hope about a future that we can share together. And so I'm really thrilled that tonight we get to talk and think about that future. I'm delighted first to introduce Joe Saddi, the president of the board of BeMA, and Lili Chopra, a great friend from many, many years here in New York, an independent curator, and the president of the US BeMA Board of Trustees. So together they'll give you a brief introduction, and then I'm just going to turn it over to Juliana and Taline, and then they'll turn it over to Amale and Dan, and after that we'll start a conversation and then open it up to all of you for questions. But really, thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting BeMA. Thank you for believing in what the future can bring Beirut and Lebanon. Joe?
Well, first of all, thank you, Glenn, and thanks to the MoMA for hosting us tonight. This means really a lot to us and is a great encouragement for all of us. When you say that this is insane, you're really not far from the truth. Most of you probably know that Lebanon has been going through a very tough time. In fact, it's the most severe economic crisis any country has faced in peacetime. The economy basically has shrunk by 2/3 of what it was. And so when we go around preaching for the museum, the trustees, our team, always get asked the same question: why, and especially why now? And you've echoed some of the reasons, Glenn, but in my own words, there are really 3 reasons why we're doing it at this critical juncture. First, the country is entering now, this month, in fact, into the 4th year of this economic crisis with, frankly, no end in sight yet. Thankfully, NGOs around the world and in Lebanon, donor countries, donor institutions, the Lebanese diaspora, private individuals have gathered, and there's been an outpouring of support to basically cater to the basic needs of the population, food, education, and health. And so what we aim to provide as BeMA is this beacon of hope to tell everyone in Lebanon that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, that one day things will turn around, that many people believe that there is a bright future ahead, and that hope has not died. So that's really the first reason. You've touched a little bit on the second one, Glenn, as well, and the trustees share the belief that art is a unifying factor. In fact, Lebanese society is deeply divided. As we speak, there are divisions along sectarian lines, along economic lines, you know, the rich and the poor, along political lines. It's a very divided and politicized society. And the team, the trustees, share the belief that through art, we can really rally the people around something that's common, which is culture, which is beauty, beautiful things, rather than be always, you know, looking at the negativity of the situation in the country. And the third reason, and you're going to hear a bit more about it later on, is to preserve our identity. It turns out that the Lebanese government has acquired throughout the years a marvelous collection of works from Lebanese artists, you know, from the 50s to the 80s or 90s. Needless to say that this collection has been neglected, you know, to say the least. It's scattered throughout the capital in many places in conditions that are not worthy of the quality of the collection. And so what BeMA has undertaken, and it's already started, work to restore, to do the necessary research around the works of the artists, around the, you know, the artistic careers or artistic path of Lebanese painters and others, and one day to exhibit this collection in a place worthy of it. So, you know, our answer in a nutshell, it's hope, it's unity, and it's identity. This is the reason why, and why now. So thank you again all for being here. Thank you for your support, which comes in, you know, in different ways. And now I'd like to turn the floor over to Lili to talk to us a bit more about that initiative. Lili?
Thank you so much, Joe, for your introduction. It is a great joy indeed to be here with you all tonight, and under the great care of Glenn Lowry and his team. And thank you, Glenn, for welcoming us tonight at MoMA. I have had the immense privilege, together with my fearless colleague of the BeMA USA board, to witness for the past 6 years the extraordinary work that BeMA's team has been developing. And what an example of care, of vision, of resilience. And I would like here to particularly recognize the unwavering passion and devotion that Rita Namour and Sandra Abunader have put into this project. And I think we can applaud them here. How challenging the context has been in Lebanon, how complex it has been to navigate these waves of crisis. And also I want to acknowledge the extraordinary bravery and breadth of cultural institutions that already contribute to the richness in Beirut and the partnerships that we will be developing with them over the coming years. With or without electricity, with or without walls, with or without support, the team at BeMA has never stopped championing the importance of Lebanese culture. It has extensively invested in arts education, in conservation and preservation, and in community engagement, stitch by stitch, renovating paintings as they would their own country. It has been humbling to be in the presence of such fierce advocates, and a true privilege to support the work. And so tonight it is very special to be in the same room all together, finally at long last, and celebrate both the presence of the new leadership who continue with the same passion and clarity the extraordinary work. And so you will soon hear from Juliana Khalaf and Taline Boladian. And you will also have a chance to hear and see for the first time the extraordinary design of Amale Andraos and Dan Wood, who have conceived the BeMA Museum. This project will need all the care, all the attention, and all the love it can get as it is truly, as you said, Glenn, a beacon of hope for Lebanon. And as we well know, dawn comes after the darkest hour. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for your warm presence, for your support, for your care. And here's for you, Juliana and Taline.
Thank you, Lili, for your introduction. And thank you, Glenn, for hosting us tonight. I'm just going to work out how to use this. Okay, perfect. I would like to start by thanking all the Lebanese in the audience for being here today, because we know that you are many. This project is very much ours, as it is yours. It's truly a project that belongs to you, and we're very honored to present it to you today. We would equally like to thank the non-Lebanese for being here today, and for affording us the chance to tell our story. Here, I summarized Stephen Vale's quote: "A museum's role is to make a difference in people's lives." And this could not be truer for Lebanon present and future. As it fights for its cultural survival, the need of the safeguarding of its artistic heritage and the need for community public spaces is more important than ever. To contextualize BeMA, we need to look at the core of its raison d'être, which lies in its collection, and which has its own history. 100 years ago, philanthropist Philippe Tarazi founded the Lebanese National Library, collecting books and art to build a national public collection. By 1954, the Ministry of Education took over that endeavor by organizing annual salons and offering contemporary artists a special space to exhibit their works. Key pieces were acquired from these shows, as well as from art galleries and artist studios. It was a time where Beirut was the art capital of the Middle East. Despite the war in 1975, the gifts and purchases continued, and by 1993, the custodianship of this amassed selection was transferred to the Ministry of Culture, the majority of which is housed at the UNESCO Palace, in storage, hidden away. Imagine that the Lebanese public and art researchers are surprised at such a collection's existence. Fast forward to 2016, Taline and I were asked by BeMA to visit the collection and assess it. The first thing we noticed as we entered the forbidding black metal door was the overwhelming smell of mold and dust. Paintings were stored tightly, haphazardly, on endless rows of shelves and in shocking conditions. Where do we begin, we thought. Luckily, the ministry had an inventory made in 1995. However, neither the format nor the content was reliable to complete our task. So we decided to build anew. To make sense of this collection, we categorized the works by era, by artist, and double-checked and corrected the details. We added condition reports, recommendations for restoration, and concluded with a selection for BeMA. So what is in this mysterious collection, obscured for 7 decades? What unraveled was a marvelous showcase of the rich history and heritage of this tiny nation, including its past hardships and its days of glories. In the earlier pieces, we find an opportunity to retell this story, while highlighting the important artists. Through portraits of prominent figures such as Fakhreddin II and Yusuf Bey Karam, stem narratives of a dreamed autonomous state. These precious works also thread the Lebanese intellectual enlightenment, known as the Nahda, Renaissance in Arabic, when new ideologies like secularism, scientism, nationalism, art and culture flourished through mass-printed literature propagated by figures such as Boutros Boustany. Here depicted by Daoud Korm, who trained in Italy in the Renaissance style and who was the founder of the Lebanese studio art practice. In the late 19th century, Beirut emerged as a thriving capital, and this is explored through Habib Throur's canonized depiction of Bchara Avedisian, considered one of the founding fathers of Lebanese urban planning. We also explored the second wave of the Nahda, spearheaded by a new generation, Khalil Gibran being a notable contributor. In this period, we encounter local imageries rendered by Fauvist-inspired artists such as Marie Haddad, the first known Lebanese female painter. During the French Mandate, Lebanon's borders are defined and modernism in both lifestyle and artistic practice are well established. Important painters of this era include Salih Badwehi, Mustafa Farouk, and Omar Unsi. Art maintains its Western influence with naive art, Cubism, and Post-Impressionism predominating in the 2 decades post-independence. In the 1960s, abstract impressionism, a movement that the majority of artists adopted and relished on. We see the beginnings of the careers of some of the greats, such as Salwa Rawda Shu'air, Arif Reyes, Yvette Ash'ar, Helen Khal, Rafiq Sharaf, and Amin El-Basha, some of whose artworks can be found in institutions such as the Met, MoMA, Centre Pompidou, the British Museum, and Tate Modern. Of course, we shouldn't forget the marginal expressionists, Dadaists, and surrealists, such as Juliana Serafim, who equally flourished in this period. The golden age of Lebanon, when Beirut was coined the Paris of the Middle East. However, this era was short-lived with the advent of the Civil War in 1975 that lasted over 15 years. As this young nation was being torn to pieces by its multiple warring factions, artists produced to recount these devastating tales, while others chose to work with abstract forms as they continued to evolve with their unique styles. At this time, the creative scene faced exceptional challenges, with gallery closures, frequent event cancellations, and sporadic cultural initiatives. Post-war art is concerned with the process of retelling of these wounds, abruptly forced into a collective amnesia. Here we appreciate the photograph of Christian Catafago depicting an abandoned sniper base and Samar Mugharbel's blindfolded man. In our selection, we also chose pieces based on themes that we felt would resonate with the public, people and places, images that remind us of our common love for this land, our folklore, our identity. For the amateurs of still lifes, this collection holds almost one still life rendering per artist, and it's amusing to see the representation of this academic practice through each artist's signature style. Considered a niche, the art of calligraphy is also prominent in the collection. And finally, we have a wonderful section of 250 works on paper, like the Salwa Rawda Shu'air, which is similar to the one at the MoMA. We have one of the largest works by Laure Reyeb and a wide section for artist Moussa Tiba. The substance of this collection is evident. For example, Saïd A'el is represented by 23 of his works spanning 4 decades, and his works are very rare, as many were destroyed when his studio burnt down. New discoveries of artists that are unknown or forgotten and deserve to be highlighted, such as Espérance Reyeb, who we believe was active in the 60s and 70s. We hold exceptional works by important artists such as Helen Khal, exemplified by this unique piece entitled Bikini, painted in 1968. And these, unfortunately, are examples of works from the initial inventory that we could not relocate. Who knows how many more are missing from this collection or where they could be. We will make it our duty to track them down to the best of our abilities. As an overview, we selected 1,275 pieces from 2,500, 210 artists from 400. The period span is from the 1880s until 2001. Of course, we have a few gaps to fill in terms of medium, such as photography. Some artists in specific categories need to be acquired, and as for era, we need to enhance the contemporary section. Overall, the collection truly represents Lebanon's classical, modern, and early contemporary art discourse. In 2016, BeMA officially signed a contract with the Minister of Culture at the time, Raymond Areji, who had the foresight to recognize the need to outsource the care, restoration, and safeguarding of this cultural heritage. Thank you.
So we have this amazing collection, as you just saw, but what's our mission? What can we do to make this collection pertinent? It's almost as if we've been given a duty, right? Like as in the biblical stories, when God gives you a treasure and asks you to do something really good with it, otherwise he's going to take it away. So the first obvious thing that comes to mind is preservation. We often get this very dumbfounded look when we say we're building a museum in Lebanon amidst this crisis, as you heard, with hungry mouths to feed, no gas, no electricity. But I have 2 responses for that. First, it's exactly this idea of luxury that we need to debunk. We need to make people understand that art plays an important and critical role in our society. It mediates, it reminds, it provides escape, it rises above politics and religion, and it challenges us to think about our society, where we are, where we were, where we are, and where we're going. It provides a haven, and as you heard, a beacon of hope, and it proves itself a necessity, not a luxury. On a more practical level, we need to preserve our national identity right now, precisely in this time of crisis before it evaporates. So first, we need to preserve the narrative. As you heard from Juliana, nowhere else do you have such a complete rendering of Lebanese art through which the history of the land and the people can be told, like in this collection. Second is its physical preservation. The state of the collection was atrocious when we first did the inventory in 2017. Actually, I wish we had documented better, but it was like an Indiana Jones series. We were literally digging up paintings in bathrooms, albeit palace bathrooms, finding the paintings in horrific condition. We had to offer the army guards fig-flavored ice cream to keep them from shortening our stay or to help them jog their memory for another room of undisclosed paintings. In some cases, the rooms and the paintings were so filthy that we had to wear the spaces, enter the spaces wearing N95 masks way before they were fashionable to do so. The point is, the collection was in desperate need, as you can see here in the picture, of housing and preservation. At this rate, and the rate it was going in, the climate conditions in Beirut, and the lack of attention, the pieces could have easily disintegrated, if not been conveniently misplaced. Apart from serving the pressing needs of preservation, when we look at this project within the larger ecosystem and the needs of Lebanon, we wanted to make sure we were filling in the gaps, that we were not duplicating any efforts that already existed in such a small and intimate society, and that we could offer an opportunity for collaboration. If we had to build a case for the museum, it would be the following when looking at it from a community perspective. There's so much lacking that this museum can actually address. We get no government subsidies like we do in the West. We have one modern and contemporary museum in Lebanon, and actually it was a house that was converted into a museum. We have limited public spaces, and just to paint you a picture, when I had my first child, I remember thinking, where can I go to push the stroller around? I would have to go to a mall. There were no public parks, there were no public spaces, there was no place for people to gather together. That compounded with the fact that the pandemic really broke the human chain. Especially now, there is a need for human touch, and the museum can heal that chain. When we look at it from an arts perspective, there is something glaringly missing from the ecosystem as well. It's very disjointed, in fact. You have 300 or so artists, and every day more so because of the refugee situation and because of censorship issues in neighboring countries. You have a handful of solid galleries representing only the most elite of artists, followed by a sparse band of institutions at the top. So no matter how beautiful or how powerful art is, if there's nowhere to access it or view it, it's quite useless. So again, we're looking to fill that gap, not only vertically, but horizontally. The National Museum across the street is home to antiquities and relics, and we want to pick up from there, offering 19th century works onwards. Of course, we can fill the gaps as much as we want, but we can't do it effectively without filling the actual museum with people. In other words, when Kevin Costner said, "If you build it, they will come," I don't think he had BeMA in mind. We need to cultivate an audience and make sure that people know this is a place for them. What's the best way to start? Education. So I remember in the 90s, and I was born and raised here, there was a huge push towards recycling. Except my parents' generation couldn't understand the importance of it, much less wanted to install separate receptacles for glass and plastic in their homes. So how is it that my father, now in his 70s, doesn't let his grandchildren throw the milk container into the normal bin? It was because the powers that be cleverly decided the only way to change a culture was to start with the kids. They had us come home, teach our parents what to do, and sure enough, only one generation later, Everyone was on board. Education is a fundamental pillar of BeMA. We have been running programs in public schools for the last 5 years, getting children acquainted with all types of art, from puppetry, block printing, graffiti, and photography. Our programs have been running in 19 schools from the north to the south of Lebanon. Another form of education, which we have been running since 2010 through our outreach programs, is education for the masses. By holding artist residencies in remote villages, intervening in their everyday lives on topics as simple as water that interest the general public, they can see firsthand how art can have an impact on their lives. And of course, on the more cutting-edge front, I would be amiss to say that we were involved in the contemporary art scene through not only offering scholarships to our future minds and talents, but we have produced the Lebanese Pavilion at the Venice Biennale and presented exhibitions in London, Washington, and Tripoli. Which brings me to the central role of BeMA. BeMA is essentially a platform, which is what it coincidentally means in Greek. And that is today the meaning of a 21st century museum. The walls of the museum give us a structure to frame and safeguard our national treasure, but it is no longer seen as the boundaries or confines. BeMA's structure should be seen as a home from which it runs its programs, but one that allows its children to go outside, sometimes disseminating information and sometimes bringing back knowledge. With that in mind, we have already launched many programs and created the foundations of the museum based on the idea of sharing and acquiring knowledge, all while keeping the collection in mind. The first of which is restoration. We have a team of restorers running the restoration program in which they not only do their work, but also research, teach, train, and exchange, again, addressing the needs of Lebanon. A restoration lab and a program of this magnitude and professionalism does not currently exist anywhere in the Middle East. And we are proud to say that we are collaborating with Sam Anderson Architects to help us create a state-of-the-art conservation lab within the museum. And here is a great image of at the top half of the work. It's kind of on its side, but was damaged by fire. So you can see the drastic difference. We kind of did a before and after there for you. So far, over 294 works have been completed. This could mean cleaning, stabilizing, retouching, tear mending, paint loss consolidation. And I love this picture. Picture is worth 1,000 words, right? Well, there you have it. The restoration team has cleverly and diligently collected all the mold and dust off of the paintings that have been cleaned so far, and they kind of put it into that vesicle. I love this. Another program we feel is integral to BeMA's positioning is its dedication to research. Last year, we began our research program. Again, here we're looking at the needs of the arts in Lebanon. We saw there were a very limited number of publications and studies out there. Only 25 publications on Lebanese artists, and you can see the numbers. Run by our head art historian and historian, our research program gives us not only the ability to eventually create publications on artists and their works, but also to create new information about time periods, styles, and art movements. We have the opportunity here to create methodologies. And I think it's important to really understand here that we are starting from scratch. Which brings me to the other equally important program of archiving. Lebanon, its artists, artist estates, journalism, and photographs is a haven for archives. From the first black and white photographs taken by the Jesuit monks in the mid-1800s and with the Armenians, to the families who kept newspaper clippings stashed away, protected from war, there has never been, imagine, a centralized place for hosting these ephemeral documents. Which brings me to my last point. I actually happened to be reading an article on the MoMA when I was creating this presentation, and about how Glenn is focusing the museum's efforts towards digital platforms and this digitization frenzy that COVID has caused in the arts. I'm so proud to say that part of our research initiative has been creating and populating an interactive database and platform which will virtually house the entire collection of the ministry, along with, for the first time ever, proper details on the artists such as birth dates, death dates, descriptions, details, restoration images, condition reports, proper names in Arabic, all accessible to the public. By doing so, we hope to create an exchange and dialogue with other researchers, institutions, and eventually countries. This is where we stand now. It has been an immense undertaking and journey so far. A board member told me the other day that it took the Smithsonian 80 years to complete. So it made me feel like we've conquered a lot of ground here and that we're potentially faster than we think. That is to say, there is momentum and the project is really on its way. And to bolster this initiative, the next step is obviously the physical building. Here to speak about how the mission translates into the building are Amale Andraos and Dan Wood, co-founders of WORKac here in New York and the star architects of the Beirut Museum of Art.
Thank you so much, Taline, and thank you, Glenn and Rita and Juliana. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here, and thank you everyone for joining. I think it's very unique to be witnessing the building of an institution, and I think that's what it's been, and it's been 6 years already. And the building sort of captures the imagination because it's so tangible and physical, but actually the process of thinking through the institution has been equally exciting. And so tonight we just want to show some process and how long it takes for things to come together. We were invited to join the competition in 2016, and at the time already, BeMA's mission was very inspiring to us, that this wanted to be a museum that wasn't closed or elitist, that this was really a sort of place where people would come together, a place that was really open and accessible. And for us, it kind of triggered this image of openness, of transparency, of accessibility, of inclusivity. I've been obsessed with Beirut ever since I left at the age of 3. Always wanted to go back. My thesis was on Beirut. We've worked on a number of theoretical projects on Beirut. This was a kind of remake of downtown Beirut. My own research on the question of the Arab city and Beirut in particular is the question of the region's engagement with modernity through architecture and the built environment and through the arts. And what was that project that we believed in, and where did it go wrong? Or did it go wrong? And I think these questions are not just particular to Lebanon. They are particular to this moment we all exist in right now across the world, asking where did we go wrong? And I see BeMA as answering some of these questions. And so inspired by this kind of sort of engagement with modernity, the building sort of started to capture some of these kind of traces and moments, as well as the kind of location of it, so intense, right on Damascus Street, which really divided the country east and west during the Civil War, and beyond that, or moving before that, the fact that this is on the USG campus, really in the heart of the city. How can this building bring people together? And so the idea was really of a kind of thickened envelope, a thickened facade, building on the kind of very generic balcony, which negotiates inside and outside in many Mediterranean cities, a way that we adapted modernism to the region, to the climate, to the culture, and create a space for project rooms, for art to be really part of life, and for a kind of facade that would be really accessible, that would also allow to negotiate a sort of not only environmental concern, but allow greenery to grow, allow for a kind of vertical sculpture garden. As Glenn said, we've been obsessed also with integrating architecture and landscape and finding ways for the building to really work in terms of the environment, not just through technology, but through its form as well. And kind of inside this thickened kind of porous envelope would be this very kind of flexible series of gallery spaces and event spaces, and kind of capturing the energy of the art life in the city. We were hired in 2018, and as many projects, after the competition sketch happened, went through a kind of very extensive series of redesign, thinking about the program, thinking about space. And in 2020, and kind of thinking and calibrating this kind of sort of open porous envelope we had designed, which kind of gave us some of these kind of images. In 2020, after COVID, after the explosion, after just a kind of sense of, again, why are we doing this? We kind of gathered, and here I just want to show how extensive the team has been and growing every day in terms of the board, the consultants, the local kind of partners, our own team at WORKac, a kind of really wonderful team kind of came together to rethink, as was mentioned, the mission and center really the core of the building. And as you heard, the mission really centered around this question of conservation. Very quickly, as Juliana and Taline were hired and did this, I have to say, amazing work, and Sam Anderson was brought on board, expert in conservation, we sort of realized that, the building really, the museum really needed to center on preserving and presenting this collection. Education became also crucial. This is not just for BeMA. I think any museum today, more than ever, is dedicated to education, to outreach, to engagement, and to kind of opening up knowledge and sort of decentering knowledge as well. And BeMA has been doing that for over a decade, and we wanted to kind of really make that central to the project. What was interesting also about the collection, there was a mention in terms of the state of the pieces and where they were found. But I have to say, and here just kind of a note of just the unbelievable work of researching and archiving with almost no means, finding newspapers and clippings and trying to put together the piece and the story. And I hope that the building will tell that story as well, of building the collection back up. And here you see kind of these Zoom conversations as we were discovering all of that was going to be stored in the building. And I think for me personally, this is more or less the extent of what is known about Lebanese art. There's not much. Often, such as the exhibition that happened in 2018 in the Institut du Monde Arabe in Paris, it's a story of individuals. There's never a kind of connecting tissue. Or, we have the story of Egypt and Iraq that are so clear in terms of demonstrating nationalism through the art movement. But for Lebanon, it's always this kind of weird, fragmented story of not being quite sure of our identity, or of being caught between East and West. And I think it's time for us to undo these narratives and allow a new generation to find in these works new narratives, new foundations for how we move forward. The most recent book, Sarah Rogers' book, Modern Art in Cold War Beirut, starts to tie Beirut in this network of kind of global influences, but we need more, so much more. And I think the archive and the research aspect of the museum will allow us to create new stories out of this work. And finally, in terms of the structure of the building itself, beyond the programming and the content, this is a building that is really at the intersection of city and campus. It's a beautiful campus, the USG campus in the heart of the city. And we wanted the architecture to, again, tell the story of the city. This is a drawing we did of the kind of sort of growth of Beirut as it moved from the little houses to the buildings. And we've been very passionate, in particular, about the Art Deco movement, which is really modern and actually captures the exact moment of the beginning of the collection and wanted the building's expression to tie with the beginning of the collection. This idea that these buildings were really made out of concrete, incredibly flexible on the interior, as per this drawing, almost like a maison de minot, but the facade incredibly rich, incredibly thickened, and kind of hybridizing influences. And so this kind of became a kind of more refined inspiration for the first initial sketch that we had for the competition. And recognizing that at the crossroads, which is the site of the building, we are also at the crossroads in terms of landmarks for the city. The National Museum, the Hippodrome, and the MIM Museum, all of these are there, and we started to kind of tailor the orientation of the facade and the museum to connect with the city landmarks as well, and try to imagine that in the future we might have a kind of cultural and educational sort of corridor that could extend as we start to tie all these buildings and institutions together. Recently, beyond the kind of immediate sort of client relationship, whether it's the USG or the board, we've been engaged quite a bit with the community and community engagement. Juliana and Taline and the board have been doing that for a couple of years now. I've been going to Beirut. This is the most recent engagement that was done last March. And, you know, what came out, it's a kind of feedback loop in the process. There was a great desire for storage. We need more storage. We need to be able to archive these collections. Where do they go? Artists are passing away. They need to be able to, give their works. And so storage became the center of much of the kind of transformations. Or how do we support emerging artists, making sure we can carve part of the permanent collection gallery floor for emerging artists. All of these things have been like live. As we get feedback, we are kind of adjusting the project. And so to really understand, Taline mentioned the museum not just as a platform, but it's a fragment of a city. It's very small. It's like 9,000 square meters. It can't hold everything, but what it can do is connect people and create a series of sort of networks and have a sense of openness and accessibility. And there was a beautiful article in a German newspaper that a former WORKac sent us, and the museum was called A Porous House. And that's what we've always wanted, the sense of porosity and of making people feel like this is a place they can go to. It is not a closed fortress.
Okay, I'm here representing, as Juliana said, the non-Lebanese, but somehow I ended up with a Lebanese family and Lebanese children, so this is just the youngest one. The way the building works is the galleries that Amale has described are wrapped around what is essentially a very straightforward rectangular interior, which is primarily opaque, so that the precious paintings don't really get a lot of natural light. It's open, of course, at the bottom and at the top, and the balconies wrap around those galleries. So it was very important that the galleries be as flexible and as hardworking as possible and as large as possible. And so what we have done is really worked while we have been, kind of steadily making the building more efficient, tightening it, making it smaller, making sure that the gallery space, which only has 2 columns in it, is really at a scale of major institutions around the world. So the galleries remain kind of these opaque, very flexible interiors around which are wrapped these balconies. And we've kind of tailored the balconies to what they need to do. So on the back of the building, you have the core, all the elevators and the big public stairs here, which allows access out to the exterior balconies at every floor. The 2 side galleries are really thought of as gardens, really planted and sized for circulation. So they're just about 3 meters wide. And then on Damascus Road, the main public face of the building, we have a very deep exterior gallery at 6.6 meters or almost 20 feet wide, which is really at a scale where we can have large sculptural installations, we can have outdoor events, and we can really play with the space. So those are the elements that wrap around the galleries to make the museum. And since it's open at the bottom with the lobby, and we have a large rooftop event space with the Education and Conservation Lab opening onto a terrace in the back, it's really not only open at every side, but also at the bottom and at the top. So this open museum is really at every facet of its existence. And here you see one of the great pleasures of being able to work in Beirut or in Lebanon is the ability of plants to grow wherever you want them, or sometimes where you don't want them. And so we're really thinking of these balconies as being very lushly planted. And we know how important, and since the pandemic, of course, increasingly important outdoor space has been to every institution, to every office, to everything. And so the balconies really can sponsor this kind of outdoor activity as it does in many other museums. And we really see it, as Amale said, like a sculpture garden where works that are meant to be outdoors are displayed in a very public way across the face of the building. And so this shows many of the different ways those balconies can be used. What's also great about working in Beirut is, it's kind of like being MacGyver. You need to work with what you have to make magic. And so the climate is great. There's a lot of humidity on the one hand. On the other hand, we don't need to worry about heating. And so the building really utilizes passive philosophies to kind of harness sustainability in an interesting way for a museum function. And so one of the things I wanted to point out, we are heavily insulating the walls. We have to build in concrete, and one of the great things about concrete it is a good insulator. We have ceilings that are made out of plywood, and that plywood conceals the mechanical systems and the lighting, as you can see in this image here, and kind of sponsors all the power. But that plywood also expands and contracts with humidity. So as the galleries fill up with people, and you would expect a much heavier load on the air conditioning, the plywood actually absorbs the humidity naturally, allowing us to reduce the amount of air conditioning by 20%. We also are utilizing a microgrid through generators, batteries, and a kind of sophisticated electrical system to manage the flows of electricity that we have in Beirut, so that it creates a kind of much more efficient system as the power comes on and goes off than you would have in a kind of typical building. And then we're using the water that we have. It does rain there occasionally. The humidity can also be harnessed. And we have a gray water system where we collect the water off the rooftops and the balconies to use in that system. We've also been working with our structural engineers to kind of create clarity. We really, want the different types of spaces across the balconies, but we also want loads to go down to the ground in an efficient way and a cost-effective way. So we've been working on the geometry, and you see here it's maybe a little bit more rationalized than in the earlier projects. So just to take you through, the ground floor is completely open. It'll be available for very large events. We have a cafe on the right-hand side as you come in, and a retail on the left-hand side, big information. And you see here how it's very porous, even at the ground level. The cafe flows out to the outside. You have the entrance here. You come out of the parking here. This is loading and registrar, staff offices, and then the access to the parking and the basement below. We've been working with Sam Anderson, not only in the conservation lab, but also the incredible archives. Here we have enough space and very specific space. We have cold rooms for photography. We have special storage, tight storage for paintings and for sculpture. And the basement archives is sized not just for the collection, but for an expanded collection where maybe even BeMA can accept other collections and store them here in the perfect conditions. So hopefully never again will people have to walk into the Indiana Jones situation that Taline and Juliana had to. The second floor, or the first floor in Europe and in Lebanon, is the conservation lab on one side with glass, and then education on the other side. So we're connecting these two important parts of the program where artists can come give talks and work with children, or children can display their own artwork, and they can also see the incredible collection and the technology and the people who are working on the collection and on the conservation. And that level opens up to the outside much more than the other floors. So we have a lot more glass. It also opens up to the roof of the loading dock and the other back of house spaces with a very, very large outdoor space, as Taline was saying, in high demand in Lebanon and not much outdoor space. So this, we think, can have a playground for children, heavily planted all around the outside, a kind of island where events and other activity can spill out to the outside. And here you see that there with the kind of Art Deco inspired Pompidou facade of all the services and the elevator core in the back. As you move through the galleries here, you see the opaque gallery in the middle with the 2 columns and the balconies around the outside. And this is a view of very flexible, very high, very well lit spaces, just a terrazzo floor, white walls, and the plywood ceiling. And this is the next level. So we have 2 levels for permanent collection. And also, I should mention, a space for emerging artists on the 3rd floor right there. And then a 2nd floor, very similar. Here you see some of the stairs going up. And then the top floor is 7 meters high. Because it's at the top, we were able to remove the 2 columns that we had. So this is a huge column-free space where very large contemporary art can be done, performances can be done, large events, any kind of activity that would require this big, extremely column-free space. I guess you can either be column-free or not. You can't be extremely column-free. And then up at the top, we have this event space rooftop looking out over the city, and that is combined with a research library and a space for archivists to work at the rooftop as well.
So really the project and this kind of main facade will kind of be the place of sort of thinking about it as a kind of series of project rooms where hopefully emerging artists can kind of either design temporary or permanent pieces. The building will be clad in travertine. We're working as much as possible with kind of obviously local labor, but also trying to source materials at least regionally. This is the entrance, the only moment where the kind of facade extends to create the canopy and the cafe on the sort of National Museum side will spill out on what is now a slightly elevated terrace. And then on the other side is the kind of facing the USG here with the loading dock and the parking access. And so, we imagine these kind of overscaled and slightly intimate spaces at time to either, provide an alternate kind of route to the museum, as well as be able to kind of support emerging practices. And at night, and the idea is that, no matter whether you're entering the museum or not, art is part of life. And this is a kind of open, inviting, always changing sort of structure, which hopefully will sort of seed the foundation for a different future. Thank you.
Thank you, Amale and Dan and Taline and Juliana. So please join me up here for a conversation that I'll begin with a series of questions and then turn it over to all of you to ask what you may. But before we start, just want to tell a little story that goes back more than 6 years to a meeting that Walid Rad, the great Lebanese artist, arranged for me with Rita Namour. And Walid said, you need to meet this person. She wants to build a museum in Beirut, and you need to talk some sense into her. And so I went to this meeting. I didn't know Rita at the time, and I fell immediately under her sway. Why? Because she and, as I subsequently learned, the board of BeMA were so sincere in their belief that you could do something in a place that was so demanding, that would lay down the roots for that future I mentioned when I began earlier this evening. And that despite all of the self-evident challenges that building any museum poses, but one in a country that had been riven by sectarian strife. And remember, this is even before the terrible explosions that rocked downtown Beirut. In a city and a country that had suffered so much, you could still imagine something beautiful and wonderful happening. And Rita, I remember that luncheon so vividly, and your passion, and then the passion of your friends and colleagues. And so when I spent the last 30 or 40 minutes listening to the work that Juliana and Taline had done, that Dan and Amale had done, what I saw here now was extraordinary. We couldn't have imagined that when we were at lunch. You couldn't have imagined that if you were in Beirut 5 years ago. And yet, despite everything, here it is going forward, so complex, so powerful, so convincing, that it's nothing short of the miracle that it is. So let me begin with a question to Juliana and Taline. You talked about the work you've done, which is so impressive. I want you to dream for a moment. Dream about 5 years from now. The museum is open. It's thriving. What do the programs look like as co-directors of this remarkable institution? What's happening? What's your dream for what somebody experiences when they walk in the museum?
I'm going to take that. Well, I think it's definitely a space that we deserve. We deserve to have a space like this. Lebanon has always been a cultural hub, always struggling. And we have so many professionals. So it's also it will be like a learning institution trying to create these professionals, offer jobs, boost the economy, boost tourism. So I'm dreaming big. Offer experiences to the public that has never had those experiences, retelling their story in a visual context, using visuals as the aid, and just it being a space where they call home.
Hello. I just wanted to add to that as well. I think that I was reading something interesting by another director of a museum, and he was saying that the 20th century museum was for art and that the 21st century was for the people. The 20th century museum was for the people. And I think that this museum will really reflect Amale and Dan's design insofar as that it will be porous. I envision people running in and running out, and it doesn't have that traditional confines that we were talking about. And there will be so much activity, not just related to art, the way we think about art, the way we are privileged to come to the MoMA or the Metropolitan Museum and see these pieces on the wall, but I think that it will morph into something so much more than that. The other day, a board member had mentioned a museum in Navarro, the Museum of Navarro, I think it is, and they were saying that they had created these computer courses right in the center of the museum, that one museum had transformed its lobby into a soup kitchen of some sorts. So I think the idea and the notions of the museum will be very transformative in the next 5 years. We will get the pieces in the building. Certainly we will preserve our culture and our heritage as Lebanese, but I think it will be so much more than that, especially in Lebanon.
So Amale and Dan, I want to ask a practical question. You've gotten to this stage, the building has evolved, you've met with different constituencies in Beirut. What's next? What's between now and the building being completed? What has to happen?
Can you hear me? Yes. Very practical. We are completing the construction documents right now, specifying door hardware and et cetera. We should be done by November. We're getting a cost estimate, one more. It's been a feedback loop to really kind of try to continue to meet the budget. Currently, they're digging to see whether we will find archaeological remains, which we may, and there's a whole process to engage with that. Hopefully, the construction should start shoring, etc., sometime in February, and then it's at least a 3-year process. There's a contractor on board already, and it's been a fantastic team. I mean, everyone who is involved is dedicated and committed. The USG has been incredibly supportive, and it's going to be construction, which is tough. But there's just a level of just commitment that I think is just astonishing. So we're moving.
So one of the things that I'm struck by when I look at the building is that on one level, it has no immediate museological antecedents, but it seems to me that it has a lot of other antecedents. And so I wonder if you would talk a little bit about the kinds of architects or architecture that was in your mind as you were imagining this. What buildings sort of went through your mental Rolodex, and how were you adapting them, extracting from them to create this striking and unusual building?
Well, I think, Amale, you should take this one, but it is one of our only projects where Amale came in like day 3 of the design and was like, I can imagine it, like it's a city plan on all the walls. But as we researched, we've looked at so many amazing modernist buildings from Beirut. We were really inspired by the balconies. You have these kind of balconies in every shape and form in Beirut, and then it was later, I think, where we really got into the Art Deco and the research that Amale had showed.
Yeah, I think it's true when I say Beirut is it's in my psyche. I mean, it's a city that is, and so I think the quality of the light as it filters through, I just was kind of had this sense of, and I was inspired by the BeMA mission of openness from the beginning. It had to be open, it had to be accessible. And museum-wise, I mean, there are, of course, museums that have, turned the facade inside out, everything from Pompidou to the Whitney here to, activating the face of the museum was kind of really crucial. And then at the same time, being very pragmatic, honestly, to say, even when we started, this program is going to change. How do we make sure that the galleries are absolutely flexible? And so the kind of simplicity of the interior was something that we kind of were looking at. And then there are, fun references, the kind of ceiling grid, which is a kind of brewer kind of moment. And for us, I think, and for me, it's this, there's such a history, whether it's through the arts or through the architecture, the city's fabric of trying to grasp to this modern project of optimism, of building a nation, of future. Where is that today? And I think the building in its references is something that I hope ties to these questions somewhat.
It's interesting. I see it differently. Of course, that's the beauty of any great work, that it can you can imagine different possibilities. I kept thinking about the exterior of the building and its cellular structure, and it reminded me of two things. It reminded me of Giacometti's Palace at 4 a.m., a surrealist work that comes alive in the imagination. And so the balconies may be an inspiration, but the possibility of these unexpected juxtapositions as they work on both a vertical and horizontal axis strike me as a kind of activation of the mind. And the other image that came to mind, which is not dissimilar from that surrealist image, was the architecture of Eur outside Rome, in that travertine with those big looping arches and again the cellular function. And it seems to me that this building, in its openness, is really about the openness of the mind as much as it is about the openness of the city, and that it allows for an imaginary to occur at almost every level. And that led me to something that you referenced but didn't dive into, which was about fragments. And I wonder whether, and maybe this is an unfair question, but in a city that has been traumatized, that has been literally exploded, demolished, and riven by so many different forces, that has become a city of fragments. I wonder if you think of this building as a metaphor for the city as a whole.
Well, first, I love your notion of the open mind and how we need to open our minds. I think, yes, I think it's true. It was at the beginning, it was this kind of a map of fragments being put together a little bit in a new way. I was also, I like Gaetano Pesce's work, kind of anti-modernist and anti-modernist at the same time, with this kind of thickened. But it's true. It's part of the city. It's really, the city is in the building's DNA somehow. It's a kind of love for Beirut in a way. That's how I see it. Yeah.
So Juliana and Taline, you laid out the collection essentially in sort of categories that you had made, but obviously the categories were there because of the art that had been collected. How do you imagine displaying the collection, which is, after all, the fun part of all of this? Walk us into an inaugural exhibition.
I think this is a very dangerous question. Thank you, Glenn, for putting us on point. To be fair, because this museum will not be built for a number of years, when Juliana and I did the initial inventory, we had selected 600 works which we thought merited being in a museum. And then we kind of rethought that along with our research head, and we brought up the number to 1,275. And we thought, to be fair, we would give a future curator or artistic director the chance to pick from a larger selection of work. So we don't really have a plan for that as of yet, but we do hope to show the pieces leading up to the opening of the museum in a variety of ways. And I think the most important part of it is to show its connection to everyday life and to the contemporary art scene. So one of the things that we have thought about is how we can have contemporary artists intervene, so to speak, in the collection and create works which might mimic things in the collection that we can then acquire. And I think that's a really nice parallel between what's happening now in Beirut and the history of this collection.
I think we also wanted to highlight, leading up to the opening of the museum, we would like to, little by little, unveil this collection to the public. Again, this is a collection that's never been seen by the public, and we want to introduce it to them a little by little so they can digest the information. Also, we want to make it as accessible as possible. So even the descriptions, we would like children to get involved, writing their own descriptions, kind of create a playful interaction with these works, and not this, the traditional, painting, and this is what you have to learn about it, and more like interactive. We would like people to participate in the explanations of these works, and trigger interest by showing them what's familiar in these pieces. So costumes, why were they wearing these costumes? These, particularly in the portraits, explain the details, the echoes in the details, and kind of interact with those details. Yeah.
I'm interested a little bit in the ecosystem in Beirut, which you touched on in that fascinating slide. On one level, you could say it's a very thin ecosystem. On the other hand, there are actually a lot of really interesting arts initiatives in Beirut. now and in the past. So how do you imagine BeMA's role within that ecosystem?
I think the first and foremost is collaboration. I think we keep repeating the same message, and I hope it's very clear that we plan to not duplicate any efforts. We don't plan to step on anybody's feet. We plan to do things that don't already exist in Lebanon. And there's plenty to be done. So we hope to work on a variety of levels, whether through researching, whether through offering our space, whether through offering our expertise, whether taking on someone else's expertise, whether using the facilities of USG, the university that we're partnering with, for their auditoriums, so as not to duplicate the spaces, in fact, to not duplicate restoration efforts. I mean, we are, for those of you who haven't visited, it's such a small country and such a small ecosystem, and it would be such a shame, in fact, to duplicate any of this. So I think that our goal and one of our missions is to really show that we're open for collaboration and that we hope to use each other's expertise to the fullest extent, because there are so many intelligent people out there with great expertise that we could learn from, and hopefully they can use our resources just the same.
So Amale and Dan, it's actually a very sophisticated building. And you're going to be building it in an environment that is challenged, to say the least. How do you deal with that? How do you plan for, an environment where there could be electricity shortages, where the normal infrastructure that we take for granted may be years from being fully realized again? How does that affect the kind of design work you do in the planning?
Luckily, we've just finished a large project in Lebanon in the north, and watched the 3 years of construction. And I think what's amazing about Lebanon is that there are many things that people do very well that they don't do well anywhere else. There are still people who can work with terrazzo or work with stone in a way. It's very labor intensive, but because labor is the thing that exists versus technology here, they still do it really well. So we've been lucky to have construction people and advisors on the team from the very beginning. And in fact, the decision to make the building from to cladded and travertine came about fairly recently, like in the last 8 months, I think, six to 8 months ago, when we realized that it was going to be, as long as we used small pieces of stone, they were more readily available and more, we could do it in a more cost-effective way than in the kind of glass fiber reinforced concrete that we had originally imagined, which turned out to be, technologically much more challenging. So it has been great to work and understand, what they can do well and what we need to change.
And I always like to say, every place has its advantage and disadvantages. And I know we think that here it's easy, but, we've had a tiny library take 10 years to be built. What you lose over there, you gain in speed in terms of lack of bureaucracy, or there is certain kinds of bureaucracy, but not other kinds of bureaucracies. There's a lot of bureaucracy here too. I mean, we're working on a small theater that has, 25 consultants. In Lebanon, we're like, who's the lighting? Oh, you're doing lighting? You're doing mechanical? Well, you're doing code? Every place is different. We just finished 2 community centers in Mexico City on a shoestring budget, but there's no code, so you have liberties, and so I think we're adjusting. And I think Dan is, the project that we just completed is outstanding, and it was a labor of love. I mean, the builder and the client lived on site. And to your question, I think we're going to be very present, and we're already making plans to send our project architect there, and we're just going to be hands-on. Everybody's going to be hands-on, like, Rita has been
Anybody
hands-on.
feel like building a building? This is the one you can participate in.
That's right. Volunteers, please, I will meet you.
So before I turn this over to all of you, I want to ask Juliana and Taline, just take a moment to reflect on the fact that BeMA already exists, right? BeMA is both a building and an idea. And talk a little bit about the programs that are happening right now that you're doing in the community and how you see those continuing.
So the main mission really is this to create this accessibility and to build this audience, because what's the point of having a museum when you won't have an audience? So that's really the core of our mission right now, which we're doing through the public school education. So what it entails in detail is that we're asking artists to have like workshops within the public schools, and this is done in partnership with the Ministry of Education, who's given us permission to access these schools. But artists from different artistic backgrounds, so it could be in graffiti, could be paper making, and photography, video, puppetry. What they would do is we would supply the equipment and the artist. The artist would teach the art teacher, and once the program is over, we keep the equipment at the school so that the artist can continue. So it's a continuous. It's not a project that just ends, and they never have access to it again. So that's one way to create, build an audience, we feel. And the restoration, which is ongoing and which is crucial, from the 600 works that we recommended for restoration, almost 300 have been restored, and it's been since 2017. So that's 5 years, with very little resources. We have one conservator who specializes in modern and contemporary art restoration. And she has a tiny team, but what's beautiful is that she's training her interns, who then become her assistants. And so we're kind of building this knowledge and expertise. We are currently made a partnership with USG to use their chemistry lab, so we can actually test and chemically test these paintings, so we can have some research on how the artists, what kind of pigments they used, and create proper research, scientific research on these works. So that ties into the research program. For the research, we're really starting from scratch. The art discourse is not complete, and there's so many artists that are unknown that deserve to be highlighted. We're checking spelling, we're standardizing spelling, biographies. So we're really starting from scratch so we can have methodologies and standards of research that hopefully everyone can adopt, follow or not. We're creating policies, internal policies. So we're really starting from scratch because these things don't actually exist. We're working tirelessly with lawyers to create, so really there's lots of work to be done. I can go on and on.
So let's take some questions. Yes, right there. I think a microphone is there a microphone that's coming down to you? No. Stand up and ask your question, but speak loudly so we can all hear you.
Okay, thank you so much for everything. Like, this is really amazing, and coming from someone who doesn't know anything about art, it's really educated people. But I just had a question. So I was browsing the website very briefly, and perhaps I missed it. Perhaps I missed it. Given, like, do you have all the human power you need in order to accomplish this by 2026? And if not, what are the vacancies that you need in order to finish? Because I was looking at the website to see what are the positions, because we're all expats and we all know people who want to help Beirut and like rejuvenate its culture. So I'm just wondering, can we have like this list? Can we help in some way? I'm an economist, so I don't know art, but like we can help people.
I'm pretty sure they could use an economist.
Yes.
Yeah, and thank you so much for all the work.
Come on. Yeah.
Do you want us to respond to that? No, there is no list on the website. We welcome you to join us, and that goes for everybody in the audience. We are looking for support in every way, shape, and form. Despite all that we've accomplished so far, we are a very small team and we have limited resources, which we will be fundraising for soon enough. And I think right now the important thing is to get these programs off the ground, for the building to be built, and then the rest will kind of follow with that. But come speak to us after, for sure.
Are there, yes, please.
Hi, again, thank you for all the work you're doing. Very impressed and excited for this to come to fruition. I was wondering, I know we've spoken a lot about community engagement and of course about the devastating economic and refugee situation in Lebanon. So my question is, what are the plans once the museum is open to both engage with the growing impoverished class in Lebanon, as well as the refugee and undocumented populations in Lebanon, and furthermore also the populations in Lebanon who do not have access to an art museum, such as those in Tripoli or in Sidon or Tyre as well. How are we going to bring those people into BeMA?
So we started that from now. We've completely decentralized our programs to have access. So the public schools, as you've seen in the map, is spread out in the whole country, from north to south, east and west. The art residencies we've done have been in remote villages, in Tripoli, in Saida, again, northwest, southeast. And the exhibitions, we've had 2 exhibitions, one in the Bekaa and one in Ras Maska. So we're basically creating programs outside the walls for now to create that audience, and eventually BeMA will continue these programs of decentralized exhibitions or art happenings. However, the headquarters would be BeMA, essentially, and it would be somewhere for the people of Tripoli and Saida. When they come to the city, they have a place that they belong to, and that belongs to them. And it's free, so it's free access, free entrance, so anyone's welcome. Yeah.
Other questions? Yes, one down here, please.
Thank you. Very impressive, of course, and thank you for giving us hope again when we become hopeless very frequently about Lebanon. There are, in the art world, of course, a lot of musicians in Lebanon, great composers in Lebanon. It's impressive that they are growing during this horrible crisis we are living in. I imagine there must be some combination between the museum and the musicians and the composers, where certainly they will draw crowds to come to the museum to listen to the music, and then they can visit the museum. Do you have any plans for that?
So we definitely, while we are concentrating on the permanent collection, which belongs to the ministry and is on indefinite loan to the museum, this remains the base of the museum. But we do have, first of all, a temporary exhibition space. We are dedicating spaces within the museum to other disciplines, whether it be dance or performance art, installation, music could be one of them. And that's definitely a part of our program. It's in our vision, it's within our vision. We are just focusing on this element for the time being. But I think, as you said, I mean, the arts don't stop at a painting, obviously. We're very well aware of that, and music will be incorporated. Yes.
Yes, please.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. So the question is directed to the architects. So I want to know from you, so how you decided on the aesthetics of the building. So I imagine you were probably tempted to think of traditional Lebanese architecture, Islamic and Arab architecture, but it seems to me you chose kind of the high modern, very forward-looking period of Lebanon's history, when, the 60s, and when everyone was super optimistic. And were you tempted to go back to some of the more traditional features of Lebanon? And if so, what made you decide not to do that? I mean, the only gesture is maybe in the arches. So there are little arches that I can see, but otherwise it's really sort of high modernism, and I applaud it. I think it's fantastic because it's a vision to the future rather than to the past.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. It's kind of caught, I think it started high modern and then softened to go a little bit to the early moments of, that's why I mentioned Art Deco, but the kind of where there's still some search and the dogma hasn't kicked in. And so there's a little bit of a freedom with the shapes and the forms where you can maybe recognize certain resonances without being able to name them. So we wanted to shift a little bit. And obviously it's not so scientific, but I think it's about suggestion. We didn't want it to have the kind of high modern dogma. We wanted to have a moment of hesitation while still maybe carry a sense of willful optimism somehow.
Other questions?
There's this question from the online, actually. Oh, okay, sorry. So online, there's a question from Stephanie. The architecture is beautiful. To ensure the preservation of the artwork, I'm wondering about the glass covering most of the building. Will it be shielding the artwork from the sun, but also bullets and bombs?
Yeah.
By the way, that is a concern not just in Lebanon.
Sure.
For those of you who have been reading papers lately, museums are no longer the safe spaces that we imagined them to be. So it's a very apt question.
Yeah. No, and I think that was something we thought about very strong from the beginning. And we wanted to make a building that looked like it was very open. But in actuality, there's almost no glass, which is, so I think, well, this is a very blurry image, but essentially the balconies are open air and just outdoor space with glass railings. And behind it, the wall between the artworks and the balconies is completely opaque for the 3 gallery floors. The only glass is at the lobby level and at the conservation and education level. And that is protected. The balconies themselves do a lot of protection. So like the traditional balconies, this one is almost 7 meters deep. So it's extremely shaded even when there's glass. And then we have shades as well.
Lili, are there other? Oh, yes, please, Taline.
I just wanted to add one thing to that, something that is quite interesting and maybe specific to Lebanon. The storage space that we created can actually act as a vault, not only for the collection that we will be housing, but also we took into consideration neighboring institutions so that if, God forbid, anything would happen, we can actually safeguard other collections as well.
Yeah, and I guess on a security point of view, the other thing to mention is that the thickness of the facade extends to the ground level. So we use that kind of zone as a zone of security. So you come in one door, you're kind of checked by security, and then you go in the second door to get into the lobby, which also is a climactic solution as well.
Lili, were there other questions from?
There is one more question. Would you add more artists that aren't part of the collection you uncovered by the Ministry of Culture, but still be part of the history, not recent emerging artists? And if yes, how can these artists reach out to BeMA?
Yes, of course. We have an acquisition plan and program, and obviously it will be through a selection and then a committee process. Just contact us and we'll review your file. Yeah. But please contact us.
Is there one last question? Yes, please.
How do you plan on maintaining the building after it's completed? If it's all going to be complimentary for entrance, is it always going to be donation, or is there a specific strategy to generate revenue?
Okay, good one. Good question. I think that's a question that, exactly, where's the economist? Do you want to come on board? I think that's a question that any institution faces. I think probably the MoMA and the Met and everybody else. I think there are definitely schemes for that. We hope to have an endowment. We also, to cover our operational costs, we'll probably have a gift shop. We will have a cafe. The space will be used for events, so you can rent out the space as well. And it will be a beautiful and quite large space for Lebanon in a downtown area. So if you know the lay of the land a little bit, there are not such large venues available for rental in downtown Beirut. So we hope that that will be also helpful to the revenue generation.
Can we take a moment to salute 4 remarkable individuals who have done such incredible work? And also, on a closing word, I want to thank all of you for being here, and I want to wish Joe and Lili and the entire board of BeMA great good luck as this project goes forward, and I hope we will all be invited to the opening.